Ivy Valentine subscribes to Mark Yoon, so should you. Enjoy your treat!
A fire god, and in some ways he became kind of like Raiden, and even higher, you know, became a titan. And so he basically made a whole new universe, created a big bang, so to speak, like, and this is his creation.
So recently Ed Boon actually did a couple interviews, and he actually let loose a lot of good information. Suffice it to say, I would actually call some of them Freudian slips. Some things that I'm not sure that he was aware that he was saying, or some things that he just doesn't care about letting loose. A few of those being like development time and things of that nature. A lot of this stuff does require some kind of interpretation or some amount of discernment when it comes to reading between the lines, but I did my best to try to look at both of these interviews and try to see what came out of it just based on what he was trying to say versus what he was actually saying, like, you know, word for word versus interpretation. But I believe that he actually let loose a lot of things. Like that clip that I just played you, talking about how Liu Kang is actually a Titan and not necessarily an Elder God. He has risen above Raiden, at least in terms of status, and this is his universe that he created. There was a lot of question about that before, especially, or at least I should say in my mind. I was like, how did this universe come about? Did he just reset time? Is this an alternate timeline? No, apparently that timeline ended, and Liu Kang, which Ed will go on to say later, is the only one that remembers what happened in the past, the previous timeline. This is the fourth kind of reset, and he goes on to admit that later as well. But I just wanted to play a couple of the clips from these interviews and give my thoughts on what he actually said, or if anything, what he actually meant.
Yeah, how did you come up with this as a system, like an idea? Like, where did that spark come from?
You know, it came from an idea that our design team came to me with. They wanted to have a feature where every character would have their own little kind of helper, right? Like Sonya would have a drone that would follow her around, and maybe Kung Lao would have some hat or something like that. But I kind of pushed back and was like, you know, let's do something where every character can use every one of these assist things. But then it didn't make sense for, you know, Johnny Cage to have, you know, a hat or a drone following him around. So we changed those little props to characters. Yeah. And then when we made the Mortal Kombat characters, we knew we had something that was really fun, you know, to see two Mortal Kombat characters kind of fighting there. And so that evolved over the course of, you know, several months until we landed where we are now.
So what's interesting here is that Ed Boon goes on to say two different kind of things that I interpreted. The first being that he was actually brought the idea of the cameo system based on somebody having like a buddy or a partner there, which was started out as like something like a drone for, let's say, Sonya or something of the kin, and that they eventually wanted to share all of them, have all of them unlocked. Which would be weird for some people to have certain accessories. I would argue that's not weird, that's just like open gameplay. There would be different options. I don't see the difference between having two partners like partner up that would never partner up, or having an item that somebody else has iconically used go to somebody else. I mean, martial arts is all about learning, right? So I don't know really where he's getting from there, but he does go on to actually say that evolved into partners, like people, like little buddies, and then that actually eventually added it into characters that you would have, and that actually adjusts things based on like which characters you're going to be choosing for cameos. Now, I would like to say that, like, I think why not go the full measure? Why stop at a half measure and just have a complete tag version of the game? Like, completely just have tag, where you have two different characters and you tag them in and out. You guys have played tag games before, you know how it works. This is basically on the cusp of tag without actually being tag. So I kind of wish they went a little bit further. And in my brain, I was like listening to this and I'm like, why didn't they do this? And then Ed Boon says this. So he basically just said that the idea evolved from things into full-blown cameos, and the system was pretty much where it is at, like, not now, but where it came to fruition within a couple of months, within a few months, which gives credence to the idea that, like, Discovery plus merger influenced Mortal Kombat 1 being pushed instead of Injustice 3, which is why it didn't have that much development time, which is what gave me so much pause when talking about this game at first, because I knew it was comparatively shorter development cycle than the previous ones. We have a hard set date for September, and he does talk about that as well. He says it's pretty much like coming out in September, so like you'll see a little bit more before then. One other thing that I wanted to actually touch on that he did mention was not only talking about the cameos themselves, but talking about that other people and other players like would have different fun with different matchups, like teaming these people up together. And I'm like, okay, again, why don't we just be able to have like a full tag mode? Like I don't understand that, but development time being an issue, I do understand more of that. I just wish that we actually had the full tag there for us to utilize, you know what I mean?
Yeah. In your cameo system, you've got characters appearing with like original costumes or like inspired by kind of older iterations of the game. Was it fun revisiting the original stuff? Is that something you wanted to do with these?
Absolutely. The cameo costumes and characters, they don't appear in the story, so to speak. They're really just like nostalgic throwbacks that we really want to have. So you're going to see a whole bunch of these cameo characters that we're going to be revealing in these classic costumes from like the arcade days, right? And so that's going to be a lot of like a nostalgic run for them.
Yeah. Is there a favorite you have, or have they not been revealed yet?
My favorite has not been revealed yet.
Okay.
And we'll see those in the coming months. You know, the game comes out September 19th, so that's not too far away. Yeah.
Oh man, is there any clues, or is it just no? You gotta wait.
It's I guess the clue would be some of the arcade favorites that you know, something that'll really trigger a memory for anybody who's been a Mortal Kombat fan way back in the 90s.
So what's interesting about what Ed Boon says here is not necessarily the time frame about when the game's coming out, because we already knew that. It's that the cameo characters are non-canon to the story, which we pretty much figured, and they're all their classic versions because he wanted to have fun with it, and his character that he wanted has not shown up yet. He does go on in another interview, which I will be talking about also, to say that like some of these characters that they be hard within the system in which they built in terms of move wise and stuff, which leads me to think like characters like Motaro, who has like that horse body, things like that actually make it a little bit rougher on the system when trying to create a balance, or even for zoning and things like that, which I don't know if balance is too big of an issue because zoners are OP in this game particularly, but that's just what he said. It's interesting to me about the purposeful use of classic costumes for cameos, because that tells me two things. That tells me, A, we're probably not going to be able to unlock those classic costumes for the main cast, and B, the cameos are set with the skins that they have. So either there's multiple versions or variations of those cameos, or we just get one version from the arcade times, and that's what we have, and that's what we're stuck with. Again, this game is probably going to implement some kind of microtransaction, so I'm not sure if like we're going to be using in-game currency to unlock skins and things like that. They did say that they're not having a variation system in this game, so I don't know exactly what it's going to come down to when it comes down to costumes, because I don't think gear is returning, and I also don't know what we're doing with skins. I'm sure we're going to get skins, and I'm not saying that it's 100%, but from what he's saying here, it just seems like our character skins that we're getting, we're not going to be able to utilize those classic skins, which is a little bit of a bummer, and also a little bit of a bummer that the cameo characters that we're utilizing can't have different versions from throughout the years. We're just going to be pretty much stuck with like the classic one that were the original arcade, you know, Ultimate Mortal Kombat 4 and below type deal. Because as somebody who loves the 3D era, and if a 3D era character does show up, I'm sure it'll be in that form, like Natara or Motaro or something like that.
We wanted it to start over in a number of ways. Story, gameplay, new Unreal, and all that. So there was a massive reboot, and so from that standpoint, everything just started being reinvented as far as all the elements of the game, and that really kind of lended itself to, let's start calling this game Mortal Kombat 1. It'll really communicate that this is not a continuation per se, of all the stories that were in Mortal Kombat 11. And so it literally starts with a big bang, creation of the universe that Liu Kang started.
Now, this interview is actually a second interview that was also given with Game Informer, and the first thing that he says here really also raised an eyebrow for me, I'd want to say, when he's talking about how they wanted everything new, and they wanted everything updated, and they wanted to actually do everything new. That's why they dealt with Unreal Engine 4. I really still think it's a shock. Yes, the game looks good. There's aspects of it that I can tell they cut corners, and maybe if you have an untrained eye, it's really hard to see, such as background variation, dynamic movements in backgrounds, foreground hiding, like a lot of stuff like that. But to do this in Unreal Engine 4 and to still make it only available on next-gen series consoles, really, besides the Switch, which we'll talk about later, really is weird to me, because I think they should have just gone full throttle and put it into Unreal Engine 5. They would have more tools to utilize, they would have more at their disposal, and more to actually make the game better and look better. And again, I think it's because this is what was available at the time from them jumping up, and it's easier to port like placement stuff from Unreal Engine 3 directly into 4 rather than skip an entire generation. But now it seems like Mortal Kombat is a generation behind, which really is an odd choice to me, especially since a lot of these new games are going to be developed on Unreal Engine 5, unless they're trying to pump out the next sequel equal to be in the same general category as like the Tekkens and upcoming Soul Calibur and things of that nature. I think that it's really weird that they would just like undercut themselves by saying that like people don't care about fidelity. Performance mode is the most important, obviously, so like you do want to have that fast-paced gameplay with at least 60 frames per second locked, but in terms of utilizing an actual game engine, I think it's just like really odd that they went with a last-gen engine. I don't know, that's just me though.
And you know, that's the thing about Mortal Kombat, is like it feels like it's kind of the forerunner of all of these story modes that we're seeing in all the fighting games now. You know, Street Fighter 6 does some cool stuff with story. It was doing it with 5 before that. Tekken is really going in like on the story modes. Why do you think it's so important to have these really like fleshed out story modes?
I also don't like actually how the Game Informer person here is kind of like hyping Ed up by saying that like Mortal Kombat has such an expansive story and other games are actually using Mortal Kombat pretty much as an inspiration to make cinematic story modes. That's not true at all. The very first Soul Blade game for PlayStation 1 had a full-on cinematic story. Countless other fighting games have had stories like before Mortal Kombat, so unless like, well, it's Game Informer, so they're usually not informed. They usually just like hire a bunch of like goobers that go out and ask really basic questions. It's GameStop, so how could you not understand that? But yeah, the line of questioning was very like fluffy. It had nothing to do really with like trying to get to the core of where certain things lie or challenging Ed in any way. It was more like, hey, we want to do these interviews in the future. We're going to make you feel good so that like you approve them in the future, instead of actually doing some kind of journalism, which is a different kind of thing, journalistic integrity, but I'm not going to talk about that here. It's just weird that he mentioned that when there's so many other games that like had full cinematic story modes in fighting games before Mortal Kombat adopted that. And talking about how Mortal Kombat 9 cinematic story is different from the 3D era is also a little confusing, because like, yes, you're going around and it's kind of like an over-the-shoulder three-dimensional kind of thing, but you're still telling an overarching story with cutscenes and stuff like that, which is a cinematic story. So just because you're running around in a linear or open area doesn't mean that like that doesn't make it cinematic. So I don't understand why they went to the lengths to make that reference either. It just seems like he was trying to get in Ed's good graces, which is not like necessarily a bad thing, but I would rather use the actual time to challenge him on questions of things that people actually want to hear about and not just pat him on the back. Maybe that's just me though, I don't know.
Thing that we're also seeing with familiar characters is cameo fighters. You know, we're seeing a lot of like classic versions of these characters, like Sonya Blade looks straight out of MK1 and the original MK1. You know,
yeah. Mortal Kombat 1992.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I guess what was the idea? What's the story reason? What was the design reason for having like these classic versions of these characters instead of like a modern version?
We really consider the cameo characters as kind of outside of the story. That's all. It's all for gameplay mechanics, and it's all for like a novelty factor. Like we really wanted to. We're going to be bringing back some really obscure characters that you haven't seen as cameo characters that you haven't seen in a long time. That might be impossible to do as a main fighter, and but their appearance and the usefulness that they are in the fighting mechanic is going to be huge, and I'm really excited about that mix of, you know, your story roster characters, those are the main fighters, and then the cameo characters are kind of like the nostalgia, novelty, you know, old memories of Mortal Kombat kind of brought into the mix.
Again, Ed here is talking about what I touched on earlier. There are certain characters that can only be used in cameo based on the system, so that's why I was thinking about characters like Motaro, that they're actually going to bring into the story, or not bring into the story, I'm sorry, bring into the cameo system as a way to feed us nostalgia, is directly quoted what he said. I don't think it's necessarily nostalgia, more that certain characters haven't appeared in a long time and certain people like certain characters. It's a well-known fact that since Mortal Kombat 9, or even Mortal Kombat vs. DC, Mortal Kombat 8, there haven't been many 3D era characters that have returned in the story capacity, which is very, very strange, and it's not like you can't pull more like Black Dragon, and it's not like you can't have like your like Serena's and like your Havocs, which I think Havoc actually may be the main villain of this game. But there's a lot of stuff in that that you would talk about that I don't understand why. It's just, again, like, it's Game Informer, so there were some like little tidbits here that I thought I could pull from, but mostly the interview was fluff and just easy to skim over and pass. But the little things that he's saying, like the little Freudian slips, if you will, talking about like the mindset of the team behind it, that's what I'm talking about. It's like, we can't put this character in the game. So they're pretty much saying like, oh, well, if you don't want Motaro to have 4 legs, like if you want his legs to be cut short and have 2 like upright standing legs like he did in Armageddon, he pretty much can't be in the game. But we can put him in as a cameo to like come in and do a move, because it's way easier to implement that kind of animation with a structure of any kind of structure without having to actually worry about balancing, which is pretty much what they're saying. I just thought that was interesting.
When you look at like kind of the state of fighting games in 2023, like how do you, like, it seems like we're having kind of another renaissance. Like you look at back in like at MK9 and Street Fighter 4 coming out around the same time, like that seemed like it kicked off like a 2D fighting renaissance. And now it seems like we're kind of like, all right, we have Tekken 8 coming, we just got Street Fighter 6, we have a whole bunch of other great fighting games that look amazing. Like how do you assess the state of the genre right now?
To me, it's like, you know, it's like you know, the planets circling the sun. Like every once in a while, they just line up, right? Like I don't think I ever can remember a major entry from Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, and Tekken all within this window, right?
Again, there's nothing question of, I've never, like, how are all these fighting games? It seems like a renaissance. Every freaking generation that we have literally has all of these games. So I don't know what they're talking about, like, windows and, like, why it seems longer. This is so weird that, like, they're just going into stuff like this. It's been a long time since, like, we've ever seen, I don't think we've ever seen in this short period of window, a Tekken, a Street Fighter, and like, it always is like this. Like, Mortal Kombat comes out like every couple of years back in the day, and so does Tekken, and so does Soul Calibur, and so does Street Fighter, so they always line up with each other. Like, even if it's not a major complete numbered entry, let's say a different version or iteration of the game, like Super Street Fighter 4, or like Street Fighter 5 Champion Edition, like all of these things, they're alongside each other all the time. They're always direct competition with each other, so I don't really understand why they call this like a new renaissance. It's literally freaking been this way since they all started on like the PS1, so I really don't get this train of thought. Again, it's just fluff. It's just a nothing burger to waste time during the interview. But this interview pissed me off a lot more than the first interview did. At least Ash from like What Culture Gaming like gives a little bit more insight of to what fans are expecting and want, and what they want to see from like the developer, than just like kind of like, you know, there's like not much there. It's like, it's kind of frustrating. This is my like second time watching it for this video, but this guy needs to like stick to online creation and hire somebody else that actually is a journalist to like do these interviews, because this is booty cheek. So basically, like in the end, the second interview didn't really offer much. There was a little bit more further insight than was already given by Ash. So I don't know, like, necessarily like why he came up with the questions that he did. Also, like, body language is really important in interviewing. So barring some kind of nervousness, which you should not have if you're a journalist, because your job is literally conducting these interviews, to be constantly like making body suggestions, like he's not listening to what Ed is saying. He gives one-word responses, then moves on to his next point. He's looking down and to the left, which means he's thinking. So he's literally just thinking of what he's going to say next, which is the last thing you need to do in an actual open conversation. So I mean, I don't expect more from Game Informer, but it would have been nice to see a little bit of journalistic integrity here. Hopefully I have the opportunity to ask some of these questions in the future, because like I would come at it from a unbiased perspective and not just like, I don't know, suck him off the entire time. I wish like he actually got to the meat and potatoes, like why they decided to go with Mortal Kombat as opposed to Injustice, which was planned so that we can actually have that information and not just speculation. Kind of things like, why do they always choose safe characters for the main roster as opposed to venturing back to the 3D era, which is my favorite partition of the Mortal Kombat franchise. Ask him things like, why do these panels of approvals for like the fatalities and whatnot, what kind of democratic process goes into that, like who gets what votes and what encourages like which. There was a lot of like hints towards stuff like that. Like they didn't like go towards a lot of realism. His basic answer was like, if it makes you laugh, then like it gets entered into fatality territory. But if it's gruesome, then we generally get rid of that, or if it's too involved or too long or too realistic. So I thought all of that was like a little insightful and a little funny. But now I want to turn the question over to you guys. Like, what did you think about these two interviews? What did you think about how Ed responded, and did you find any kind of insight within the words that he was saying also, or do you think it was pretty much just like up front and center? I don't want to get anyone's hopes up, but any thoughts, guys, are always welcome in the comment section down below. And as I always say, I love it. Thank you.
And thank you.